We're doing top 10 teachings of the Daf, Brachot 61. The top 10 teachings are, number one, the Holy One, blessed be He, created good and evil inclinations. That's humans. What about animals? Do they also have a good and bad inclination? Number two, Oy li, woe is to me from my creator, and oy li, woe is to me from my inclination. Understanding the duality and the conflict, the inner conflict of the person. Number three, Adam and Eve as du partsufin, as two faces in their initial stage of creation. Number four, the alternate to that, which is Eve as starting out as a rib of Adam and then being created from that rib into a full woman. Number five, originally God wanted to create Adam and Eve, but then he ended up creating Adam first, which is an extension of number four, as opposed to number three, where they were, in fact, both created at the same time. Number six is God beautifying Eve before bringing her to Adam, what we learned from that. Number seven is the idea that the righteous are judged by their good inclination and the wicked by their evil inclination, and the Beinim, the in-between, are judged by both inclinations. What does that mean? Number eight, the world was only created for the totally wicked people or the totally righteous people. What does that mean? Number nine, Rabbi Akiva and the story of the fox and the fish. And number 10, Rabbi Akiva and his final hour. Okay, let's start with number one. We're on Brachot Samach Aleph, number 61. And the Gemara says the following. Arash Rav Nachman bar of Chisda. Rav Nachman bar of Chisda offered the following drasha. My vayitzer. For this, you'd have to see it inside. What is the meaning of the verse that has the word God created with two yuds in it? God created Adam with why is there an extra yud in the word vayitzer, which is to create or form? And that teaches us, this is the drasha, this is his teaching, that Shnei Yitzarim bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Echad Yetzer Tov, Echad Yetzer Ra, that God created two inclinations, a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination, and a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination. Okay. Seems pretty straightforward and consistent with what we know about how the Talmud understands the human condition. And actually, that's going to be a common theme of helping us understand the Talmudic view of the psychology of the two inclinations that are battling for supremacy over the human being. But the Gemara is bothered by this drasha, or at least Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak is bothered by it, and he challenges it by saying, why does it say, or not say, by the creation of a beast, the same vayetzer, a creation or forming with two yuds? Does not a beast also have a yetzer, an evil inclination? Because we see that they bite and kick, so clearly they do have an evil inclination as well as a good one. Now this doesn't seem to be such a strong challenge because the way many of us understand the Yetzer Hara is that it's animalistic in nature, it's selfish in nature. And therefore, to now say that actually animals do have a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, to say that animals do have a good inclination as well as a bad inclination, is, to say the very least, surprising. So that's what the Talmud does. It continues to surprise us, and let's analyze what this means. And what it seems to mean, based on the text itself, some of the commentators, but it's just a simple reading of the text, is that when you, let's say, have a domesticated animal, let's say you have a cow, and this actually works out really well with a whole tractate of the Talmud, or a section of the tractate of the Talmud, that deals with the concept of a shor tam and a shor hamuad. It's a section in shor tam means we'll translate it according to the Rama, a regular cow or ox, versus a muad, something that's become habituated to do something that's not a normal type of thing for a cow and an ox. And this is the beginning of Baba Kama, that deals with the Arba Avat Nesikin, the four prime categories of damages or things that a person is just responsible. And one of them is discussing this concept that's kind of brought up here about the shor, the various ways in which a shor can damage. So here it mentions biting and kicking. We also know that there's other things it can do as well. It can eat. Now, eating, interestingly enough, is not one of the things mentioned here, because eating is natural, and eating is something that it can misbehave and eat when it's not supposed to eat. It could eat. You could be going through the marketplace and it could stick its head into somebody's merchandise and eat the person's merchandise, or you could be going somewhere, or it could break into a neighbor's place. So there's all of these things, and that's the Gemara Baba Kama that deals with all of the which is the Av, which is the Tolda, and so on and so forth. But what I wanted to bring out is you have this concept there of a tam and a muad in certain things. For example, goring, we say the regular ox shouldn't gore. So it's almost like we only obligate the person to pay half the price, as opposed to an animal that eats, where it's this regular thing to eat, and you'd pay the full price under certain circumstances. It's beyond the scope of our discussion to get into the nitty-gritty details. It's a beautiful Masechta. We'll get to it, God willing, one day. What the point is that the Torah sees that even there's a psychology of the behaving animal versus the non-behaving animal. And therefore, we're learning that there's a behaving animal when the animal behaves according to the way it's expected to behave. Now, it might require something on the human's part to train it and domesticate it properly. But when those things are done, and it was trained properly, and it in fact does behave, we would say that it's acting in tandem with its Yetzer Tov, with its better inclination, as opposed to when it acts out, when it bites, when it kicks, when it gores, it's acting out in a way of a negative inclination, Yetzer Hara. So this simple dichotomy that we see and talk about, that a person has the two inclinations, the Gemara is trying to say that may be true, that maybe the maximum battle between the two inclinations is going to be in the human being. But don't think that there isn't a battle going on within the animal kingdom as well. Take in point, today most people don't have cows and oxen. We don't live on farms for the most part. But many people have dogs, and they can tell you extensively about their dog's misbehavior, their dog's affection, their dog's lack of training, or the effect of a inadequate training from the owners and how that affects the dog, and so on and so forth. So this idea of kind of leaving out psychology from the animal kingdom is just, it already, the Talmud already understood that we need to understand our domesticated animals and our pets better, as also having a good and bad inclination. So that's the first thing. Now, it's still very disturbing, because the fact that we're comparing them might lead a person to think that the simple animalistic levels of inclination is exactly what a human is. A human is just another animal, and that's not the case. And that's where we're going to go further and further and unpack what those differences are, as well as those similarities in this page of Talmud. But interestingly enough, we begin with this concept that there are more things in common than many people are aware of. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, we said, was the Gemara continues and offers another interpretation because of this question that Rabbi Nachman asked that we just talked about in number one. Another answer is offered to why the word vayetzer, or vayitzer, with two yuds, why the formation of Adam with two yuds. And this is from Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, who said it teaches oi li miyotzri v'oi li miyotzri. Whoa, or it's a Hebrew word which we now also use as a Yiddish, or not even Yiddish, just to say oi vei. Oi means whoa. And that's the Hebrew word as well. Oi li miyotzri, whoa, or oi is to me from my creator. V'oi li, and oh, oi vei is to me miyotzri, from my Yetzer Hara. So Rashi says the following thing. Rashi says, Oili miyotzri, woe is to me from my creator, im elech achar yitzri, if I follow my evil inclination. So the first thing is, many people, they believe that God not only exists, but gives them some divine imperative of rules to live by. And yet they're tempted to often do the opposite by their own internal desire, we call the Yetzer Hara. It's part of the person, but it isn't necessarily the essence of their soul. But it's, as we said before, there's a continuum, there's a biological continuum with the animal kingdom of things we share in common. And we have very animalistic tendencies, including things that might be the same as an animal behaving badly, a human could behave badly. So it could be the person is irritated, so they want to hit somebody else, not because that person, the person irritating them is physically threatening them, and they feel that the only way to defend themselves is through violence. No, it's because they just don't like the person. The person is getting on their nerves with their speech, and they take it out with a smack. So that's an example of somebody acting out violently, inappropriately, because of their discomfort or whatever it is. And that person is obviously not doing what they were supposed to do if they listen to what God said. Don't hit somebody else. That's one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. We learned it out in the Torah from a particular verse. So that could be one of many examples. There's so many examples, so many endless examples of the Yetzer Hara taking somebody away from what they believe is the right thing. So when the person does that, they should feel a little bit of guilt of like, oh, I let down my creator by following the desire of my Yetzer Hara. And then Rashi continues and says the following. If the person doesn't succumb to the desire of the Yetzer Hara, they hold back, Woe is to me because my desire is going to drive me crazy with the thoughts, meaning that there are many things that if the person doesn't act on them, the Yetzer Hara is going to constantly bother them with, you should have hit him, you coward, you let this guy get away with insulting him, and the only way to put him back in this place is to punch him in the mouth or something, and you're going to go back to that place where you're going to be tortured by thoughts of how you should have acted out with the rage that was in you. And now the psychologist is going to say, well, you have a lot of rage, and we need to talk about that rage. How are you going to get out that rage? And you don't know, because you're now you have a raging part of you within you. So that's one example. It could be so many other areas in life. It could be something that you want to eat that's not kosher or very unhealthy. That's one area. It could be areas of many things that when you don't do them, it doesn't mean that the Yetzer Hara is going to say, okay, you didn't do it. You didn't. No, the Yetzer Hara is going to stay after you and going to make you want to continuously bother you to do that thing that's wrong. So whatever you do, you're going to be tortured from either guilt of I didn't listen to God, or the Yetzer Hara saying, go and do that thing, go and eat that thing, go and punch that guy, go and do that thing that was pleasurable that I wanted you to do. It's going to keep bothering you to do those things. The bottom line is that this is the very nature of the dichotomy of why it's so challenging to be a human being, to have faith in a God that gives you principles of right and wrong. And on the other hand, by the way, even the people claim they're atheists, they still believe in right and wrong for the most part. So they're not really pure atheists. They come up with other excuses of how there would be some other rationale of why there would be right and wrong. So they in fact do believe in some form of right and wrong. So everybody has some level of guilt of letting down what they think is God's imperative or their imperative of how they should have acted. Now, where that's coming from, again, different people will tell you different things. And then on the other hand, when they do live up to their moral principles, it doesn't mean that the Yetzer Hara is going to make it easy on them. So they're going to be tortured. So I just want to share the Ben Yehoyada, great commentary by the Ben Ish Chai, who says the following on number 2, that the what we were talking about now is Rashi basically, and it makes sense, and it's all very good and well. But sometimes there's a hidden agenda where the Yetzer Hara doesn't come on with the power to get you to really do an avera. It does the opposite. It gets you to do a mitzvah, but then it gets you on the high horse. Have you ever met somebody who every time they do a mitzvah, it just increases their arrogance 1,000-fold? Like they become unbearably haughty. So it's like what it is woe is to that person that their Yetzer Hara fooled them into doing a mitzvah to make them feel superior to everyone else in an unwarranted way. Meaning, of course, there's a little bit of pride in a good thing, but the extent of this person's pride, their mitzvah itself becomes an avera. Now, where do we see that? We see, for example, the Mishnah Pirkei Avos says that don't make the Torah something like a crown to take pride in, or a tool to like cut down other people in. And clearly, some people are using Torah and mitzvot in a way that's very selfish and self-serving, and the Yetzer Hara has infiltrated their way of doing mitzvot. So the Ben Yehoyada asks us to take a deeper look, not just at our averot, to not do averot, but even at our mitzvot, to make sure that the Yetzer Hara has not gotten control of us by letting us do a mitzvah and then belittling everyone else and having a false sense of superiority that's not commensurate to what we've done. Okay, there's more on that, but we'll get to that as well later when we talk about the book of the Tanya and how important the understanding of this daf is to connect it to the ideas of the Tanya. Okay. Oh, let me mention let me mention a little bit of the Tanya now, as well as Rabbi Ashlag in number 2, because that'll help us when we get to number 7 and 8, because this is kind of a prelude to 7 and 8. So basically what you have in the Tanya is understanding the two souls, that there's not just two inclinations, which is the Gemara is saying, but that the source of each inclination is a different soul. That answers a lot of questions. So there's the divine soul and there's the animal soul. The divine soul is the source of the Yetzer Tov, and the animal soul is the source of the Yetzer Hara. And in the teachings of Rabbi Ashlag, what he brings to the table is what he calls the Ratzon L'Kabel versus the Ratzon L'Hashpia. The divine soul, the source of the divine soul is divine, and the ultimate thing that God does is he's a giver. He creates the world, he gives kindness, doesn't need anything for himself. And that's what the divine soul represents, as opposed to the animal soul is the Ratzon L'Kabel, the desire to receive, to say, I need, I want, it's all about me. So that's two ways, the way of the Tanya and the way of Rabbi Ashlag, to set up for some of the things in number 2, as well as number 7 and 8 as well. We'll get back to them in more detail later. Okay, now we're up to number 3. Number 3 is Adam and Eve, as they were created as equals with two whole bodies that were connected, that were connected as one, two that were one. Let me read that to you in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Du partsufim bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'adam harishon. Two figures God created in Adam. In other words, it was really Adam and Eve. Shenemar, as the verse says, Achor v'kedem, back to front, Tzartani, you have made and created me. Now the Gemara says, in fact, on the verse, V'yiven Hashem Elokim es hatzela, and God built the side that he took from Adam into Eve. So on that, there's actually a debate between Rav and Shmuel. One says it's a partsuf, that it is and that's the one we're going to be talking about in number 3, that it's not that Eve was an appendage or a rib. She was an equal half, a whole being that was attached originally to Adam. It was Adam on one side and Eve on the other side. Now, that's why it would make sense, that verse that says, Achar v'kadem, Tzartani, that front to back, you have created Adam and Eve. Now, that's also what we were referring to in number 1, about Yetzer, that God created us with two yuds, that there was a duality. There was the male and female that were created as one. Now, also in one of the accounts of creation, it says Zachar and Nekeva Ba'aram in chapter 5, verse 2, it says, male and female, he created them. That would mean that initially they were created as the total male and total female, although they were still attached. Okay. And then God had to detach them. So the time that he put Adam to sleep, it wasn't so that Eve could be created, because Eve totally existed. It's just that he had to operate on detaching them from each other, and that's why it says v'yiskar basar tachtana. He filled in the flesh of the cut so that they would both be healed and they wouldn't be, have a terrible scar. Okay. Now, this concept is also a similar concept that's found in Greek mythology. I believe it's in maybe it's in the Symposium, where it talks about how there was that the original humans were created front to back, and they would defend themselves, and they fought against the Greek gods, and they gave them a run for their money. So when the Greek gods finally suppressed the rebellion, they divided them up. And therefore, according to this Greek mythology, men and women are always looking to be reunited because they originally came together. The very similar concept that we talk about in soul, in terms of a soulmate, that we were originally one or connected, and we got split apart. So we're looking for each other. Particularly, a man looks for the woman, according to the Gemara. So that's the Greek mythology. But let's talk a little bit about the Kabbalistic, particularly the concepts in the Arizal. So first of all, a big part of the Arizal is based on the understanding of what he calls the Partsufim. The Partsufim means the face or the features of not just the face, but the levels that are metaphysically corresponding to a prototype of which the human soul will eventually be based on. Okay, that's a little complicated there. Sorry for that, for some mouthful. But to put it in other terms, when Adam and Eve were created as one, they represented the potential of all of the souls that would eventually come out of them. But they also represented an early stage in which, for a specific reason, they needed to be united and not separated from the get-go. And the reason that's given in the Kabbalah of the Ari is that when something isn't developed enough, so then there's a vulnerability for the klipot, for the forces of darkness to infiltrate that level of whatever it is that's still vulnerable. So since Adam and Eve hadn't yet gone through enough tikkunim, enough rectifications to safeguard their backs, the backs represented their vulnerability of that which wasn't developed enough, they had to have their backs attached so they wouldn't be vulnerable. In a sense, there's a similarity to this idea that they could safeguard each other because they were back to back, so they could defend one another, not so much on a physical battle, but a spiritual battle. So in order for them to be able to be split apart, they had to strengthen certain processes of their vessel, of their backside, so to speak. So then that would allow for them to be separated. So it represents a necessary stage. Many of the things in the story of Genesis like this back-to-back thing and then being separated according to this are explained in Luriana Kabbalah to be the unfolding of the stages of how we get from God's will to create the world to actually being in existence. So this is a necessary stage. So that's number 3. Number 4 is the other opinion that says that Adam was not created with a full other female form attached to his back, but rather Adam was created alone, and a part of Adam, an appendage of Adam, which we say the rib. That's what many people read the biblical story, and they notice that reading, but that's only one of 2 alternate readings of how to read that section in the Bible. We just went through one whole way of answering how all of those verses do not mean a rib. They mean a whole side, and they mean a whole human being that was formed equal to Adam, that was then separated. But in this other reading, it is in fact a rib or something, some part, an appendage of Adam that's then taken, formed into, stretched out, so to speak, metaphysically. We don't understand any of these things, what they mean on a literal level, but taken and formed into a full human being, but it wasn't originally a full human being. So that would be, for example, we'll go over some of those verses. And explain them. I'll explain the one about one of them in number 5. It's as its own thing. But so when it says that he filled the flesh back in its place, it means that since some part of Adam was removed, the appendage was removed, so God had to make, so to speak, a fixing in that area so it wouldn't be wounded. And a number of other things. I'm not going to go through each thing, and the Gemara explains it. For example, by Yevon, he built her. It would make more sense in the verse in Genesis chapter 2, verse 22, is that he literally took something very small out of Adam and built her into a whole being. That actually is more problematic for the earlier opinion and fits in better into the text with this idea that he took her from an appendage of Adam, and God took Eve from an appendage of Adam and built it out. Now, why would God do this? What's the point? It also, unfortunately, I think wrongly, makes people misunderstand the role of the primal humans, Adam and Eve, in a potentially misunderstood way as Adam being more significant. And that's not what it per se means. But what it does mean is the following. There's a few things we say that we can learn out from this. One thing is we learn out from this that if a person saves another human being, it's as if they saved the whole world, because every human being is like the original Adam. They have as much importance as the one man that was the only man that was originally created. So in that sense, by creating one man, we talk about the value of one man representing all of humanity. So in that sense, whether it didn't have to be Adam, it could have been Eve, arguably. It just had to be one of the two that was created first, teach you that that one life is a whole world. A related thought to one life being the whole world is as important as it is to find a soulmate and to get married, start a family, all those things. It's a mitzvah to do that. At the same time, a lot of people feel inadequate on their own. as if they're only validated with somebody else. And while there is good reason to have something that gets you out of your own comfort zone and go out there and go on a shidduch and find somebody, if the person is always feeling inadequate and always needs somebody else to validate them, that's the Gemara, my understanding of perhaps the Gemara interpreting the idea of the rib is telling us, no. There is a part of Adam and a part of Eve, for that matter, that you stand alone. You stand alone between you and God. You don't always need yourself as I am a husband or a wife. There's a part of you that could be, you exist on your own. Later on, God will create a soulmate for you, and you'll also have to find that person. But it's an also, it's not an only. So it's to bring home the idea that not only is every human being a whole universe, and if you save them, it's like you save the whole universe. It's to understand your own significance on your own, not to mean you should be happy on your own, period, full stop, and never look for anybody else to start a family with. It just means there should be some part of you that recognizes the essential you-ness that God created you as an individual. He also created you as part of a potentially loving couple, but that's not the only thing that he created you as. So perhaps this teaching of Adam being created alone gives room for those who need that to strengthen their own individuality. If it's too shaky and they're always looking for validation and have like inferiority complex without it. So maybe that's another reason, another thing we can take out of that. So that's number 4. Number 5 is extension of this conversation of 3 and 4, which is that originally God wanted to create Adam and Eve. According to even the 4th interpretation, that Eve was, so to speak, originally just part of Adam's rib and then expanded on, is that really that wasn't the plan originally. God wanted to make Adam and Eve either together or separate, whichever one. But then he, in fact, created Adam first and then Eve out of Adam. So the question is, what does that mean? Now, I don't really know what that means, but we know there's a parallel to this in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that says that there's a debate between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua about whether God created the world in Nisan or Tishrei. And one of the things Tosfos talks about it is that it's possible to say that he desired to create the world in one of those times in Machshava, in thought, but in Ma'aseh, in actuality, he created it at the other time. So, for example, it could be that in actuality he wanted to create it in Nisan, and in actuality, in potential, he wanted to create it in Nisan, but then in actuality, he created it in Tishrei. That's one way of looking at it. That's actually, I don't think Tosfos says that way, but that's one way. Which would mean what? Which would mean that, for example, Nisan represents actually let's do it the opposite. He wanted to create in whichever one. Each energetically of the month, Nisan and Tishrei, represents something different. So on the one hand, he wanted to include, let's say, Nisan represents the beauty of God gifting the world with a beautiful spring, and that represents certain kindness that he's giving to the world. So on the one hand, he wanted to do it out of a pure act of kindness and love. On the other hand, he held back with doing it just out of love because he wanted to teach responsibility. So it manifested in Tishrei, which is a month of judgment and responsibility. So it basically means it's a way of including the kindness with the judgment in that context. That's just one of different ways of explaining what that wanting to create in one month and actually creating it in another month might mean. Different ways of explaining it. That's just one of a few ways. Now, how's that relevant to what God wanted to do to create Adam and Eve together? And then in actuality, only creating Adam first. And the answer would be similar in that he wanted to create us together because he wants it to be that man and women are equal ultimately. And there might have been a process in which people going through history didn't think that for whatever the reason, because the woman had to be more involved in raising the children and things like that. So the man had more of a responsibility in front of the community for whatever the situation was. But ultimately they are equal. So therefore, God wanted to make Adam and Eve to show the whole world they're equal, they're the same. But in actuality, Adam preceded Eve, perhaps because historically speaking, there had to be a period in which the man took the lead before they could really be considered equal. That's one of many interpretations of what the potential versus the actual could represent. Okay, so that's number 5. Now we're up to number 6. Number 6 is that God beautified Eve before he brought her to Adam. The Gemara says the following. It says, and he brought her to Adam, v'yaviyeha el ha'adam. That's the verse in Genesis. And Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar says that teaches us that God was the Shushvin. Shushvin is like the equivalent of what we call the best man or the best woman, or the maids of honor. Different kind of contemporary ways of designating special relationships in the wedding party. So the Shushvin was like the equivalent of like the best man. He took a lot of responsibility to take on some of the financial obligations of, let's say, one of the sides of the chassan or the kala. So in this case, who's the best man? Who's the Shushvin? Who's the one who accompanies Adam and Eve? Because it's God. So since he's the Shushvin for Adam, so he took it upon himself to arrange the details of the wedding. So what do we learn from this? We learn from this that even a great man shouldn't say, a man who is wealthy or powerful or learned, shouldn't say, who is this plain person that I should take care of them and help them be their best man for the wedding? God didn't say that. God said, I'm going to help them. And the Gemara also says that on the verse Vayiben Hashem es hatzela, that God built Eve according to the opinion that Eve was already built. It doesn't mean he built her, it means he beautified her, because they would call somebody's hair that's braided a binyan, like it's some type of build. They would build it, whatever that means, like to make a nice, beautiful hairdo is like a building. It's an expression that they would call a braider of hair a builder in some place overseas. In I don't know where that place is. So what does that teach us? It teaches us that God was not just bringing her, but beautifying her, making her hair look really beautiful. So there's a thing about feminine beauty. A lot of people are like, what's why not just have the natural beauty? Why bother with beauty products and working on it? And apparently, according to this Gemara, it was worth God's time to almost mystify the feminine. I'm going to understand or interpret the beautifying her hair to mean that there's some mystical divine element into the feminine beauty that God is imbuing into the making of the hair. And that represents the unknowable quality that God gives to a woman to make a man desire her. in particular situations, especially for a bride to a groom. That's particularly what we're looking at right now. So that's number 6, God beautifying Eve. Now we get to number 7, 8, 9, and 10. 7, 8, and 9 are really going to be related, and they have to do with understanding the psychology of the human experience according to the Gemara and according to some later interpreters of the Gemara. Number 7 is the Gemara says the following. Turn the page to Samach Aleph Amud Beis. And the Gemara says the following. Tanya Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer. It was taught in the name of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Tzadikim Yetzatov Shoftan. The righteous are judged by their good inclination. As the verse says, V'libi chalal b'kirbi, and my heart is void within me. Rishayim Yetzarah, or hara shoftan, the wicked are judged by their evil inclination. Shnema ne'um peshel rasha, b'kerev Levi, ein pachad elokim l'neged einav. As the verse says, that David says, in my heart, evil speaks, saying, let there be no fear of God before me. In other words, the person doesn't have regrets, doesn't have a sense of not doing the wrong thing because God said not to. They don't have that. So that's the Rasha. And Bainanim, the third type of person, is an in-between person. That person we say Zev Zeh Shoftan. They're judged by both the good and the bad inclination. Like the verse says, Ya'amod li'min Avion lahoshia mishoftei nasho. God stands by that person to the right of them to save him from those who judge his soul. And Amar Rava, Kigon Anu Beinanim. Rava says, like us, we are average. Abaya says to him, Lo shavik marchai l'chol beria. If you are saying you, people like you on your level, are Beinani, what about the rest of us? No other creature could live by that standard. We'd all be Rishayim. Okay, what is the Gemara saying? Now, one of the things about the Gemara, to put it mildly, is that the Gemara says things, and we have the choice to try to understand them or just say whatever. I don't really know what it means, And many of the great rabbis, what they did is they spent days, weeks, months, years trying to unpack Gemaras like this. One of the great works of the Hasidic writings is the book of the Alter Rebbe known as the Tanya. It's a very important book in Hasidus in general, and particularly in the way Chabad esteems that book. And the first, it's 5 books within one, but the first one is considered the most significant. And it begins by quoting this Gemara. Okay. Let me see if I remember what the Tanya actually begins with. Tanya. It's actually, it doesn't start with this Gemara. It starts with another Gemara, a parallel Gemara of Mashmian Osotei Tzaddik V'Altei Rasha. We make a soul before it's born swear that it's going to be righteous and not wicked. And even if the whole world does in fact tell this person they are tzaddik, they should see themselves as a wicked person. And the Tanya goes on to ask a series of questions that if you see yourself as a Rasha, that's going to be problematic. You're gonna think badly of yourself. And then the Tanya goes on to bring in this Gemara and other Gemaras and talk about, well, what is a tzaddik? What is a Rasha? And what is a Beinoni? And it comes up with the following answer. And I'm simplifying because anybody who wants to know what the Tanya says should, there's plenty of translations and commentaries of the Tanya. There's no shortage of that. So I'm going to simplify and say the following. The tzaddik is not just somebody who mostly does good, which is what a simple reading of the section of the Talmud here would be. A tzaddik is mostly good, a Rasha is mostly bad, a Beinoni is really in the middle. But the Tanya says that's a borrowed term to use that as a tzaddik is mostly good. A real tzaddik is all good. A real Rasha isn't all bad. Is anybody who does a bad thing, before they do tshuva on the bad thing, they're associated with that bad act, and they're a Rasha. And then to be able to explain what's a bad thing, is it just a bad action, or what if it's a bad speech or a bad thought? So here's where the Alter Rebbe comes up with the big chiddush, very controversial in the sense that it's very far from the simple reading of the Gemara of the text. But he uses this thing of Rava, it's either Rava or Rabba, that says Kigon Anu Beinanim. He has another version, Kigon, like I'm a Beinoni. To say if Rabba thought he was a Beinoni, it must be that a Beinoni does everything right in their thought and speech and action. The only thing is they have unconscious thoughts that well up that are inappropriate, but they control those thoughts and don't let them they control them to they're just fleeting thoughts that they don't dwell on. Their conscious mind, they're in control of. Their unconscious mind, they're not in control of. So the thoughts come up, but they don't dwell on them. They just push them aside. So a Beinoni is basically doesn't control their unconscious, isn't a tzaddik on an unconscious level, but in conscious thoughts and speech and action, it's all according to the Torah and the mitzvah. And that would explain why Rava could think of himself as a Beinoni. So that's a little bit about the Tanya. And that's why, for example, by a Beinoni, it says he needs God to help him. Why? Because it explains that there's the judge doesn't mean who controls you. It just means an opinion. A judge offers an opinion. There's different judges, they offer their opinion. So the judge offers an opinion of what wants the Beinoni to do. But there could be the bad judge, meaning the Yetzer Hara still has an opinion of what it wants the Beinoni to do. The Beinoni just decides not to listen to it. And the only way it doesn't listen to it in thought, speech, and action is because God saves him. But the other part of God saving him is, which is parallel to it and connected to it, is the concept of moach shalit al halev, that the mind has control over the inclinations. Because then it gets into details of how the primary resting place of the Yetzer Tov, which is connected to not just a good inclination, but connected and an outcome, a derivative of the Nefesh Elokit, the divine soul, is more associated with mental abilities. And the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination or bad inclination, which is more connected to the Nefesh HaBa'amiyut, the animal soul, is more connected to the physiological part of the heart, the boom, 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 that wants to do whatever it wants to do. And they're in constant battle. And it's the Yetzer Tov can infiltrate the mind into the heart, and the Yetzer Hara can infiltrate from the heart into the mind. And they're constantly in battle for the person, for the different parts of the person. And the Beinoni exerts self-control because he or she learns the concept of how to use moach shalit al halev, the mind, to control the heart. And that's what many of the meditations or contemplation practices that are in the Tanya are, to kind of build you up, to give you the ability to do that. It's very hard in practice. Interesting theory. And as the Tanya itself says, halavai, if only a person could be abandoning for a small amount of time, an hour or a minute, different ways of reading it. Sha'achas kol yamav, even just a moment in their whole life to reach that level of abandoning would be a very high level. So that's the Tanya. Now we go on to number 8. Number 8 is the world was only created for completely wicked or completely righteous people. Very strange Gemara. Let me take a look at that inside. Amar Rava. And Rava says, Lo ivre alma el rishoy gemara el tzedekah gemara. The world was only created for completely righteous or completely wicked people. And Rava says, Leida inish benashe im tzedek amar hu im lav. Person should know whether they're completely righteous or not. Amar Rav lo ivri alma elo la'acha ben Amri elo Chanina ben Dosa. Rav says, following a little bit this earlier statement that the world was only created for the completely righteous, completely wicked, Rav says the world was only created for the really awful Ahab, was married to Jezebel, who really just stole and killed to take whatever he wanted for himself with his wife. Terrible people. And on the good side, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, the miracle worker, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, who many miraculous things happened through his prayer, who only sustained himself with a little bit of small measure of carobs, and the whole world was getting its sustenance in the merit of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, and he took almost nothing for himself on a physical world. What is the Gemara saying? The simple reading of the Gemara is saying there's two extremes. There's extreme pleasure of this world, which means you lie, cheat, steal, kill to take whatever you want. You need power, you need money to get the pleasure and to protect yourself from the corruption that you can get away with. That's achab. That's the epitome. In other words, if you want to grab this world fully, you have to be willing to be a complete psychopath, a complete animal, a complete terrible human being, the worst of the worst, to get whatever you want, to get all the power and the pleasure that you want. And if you want to be good, if you want to be all the way good, you have to be willing to forgo everything other than the most bare, simplistic survival, because everything is not about this world, it's all about the next world. But the question is, why the dichotomy? Why all or nothing? Why can't we enjoy this world in a kosher way? And why can't we do mitzvot? I mean, what about normal? What about everyone in the middle here? So that's a good question. One of the best answers I found to this, it is the simple answer is, yeah, the Gemara is saying, giving us some extreme. It's just a kind of moral lesson, but it doesn't really mean it. Okay, just telling us, if you go to extremes, these are these two extremes. But there is an answer. And the answer could be found in the writings of Rabbi Ashlag. And I'm particularly using his Akdama for the Zohar. The Rabbi Ashlag is known as the Baal HaSulam. And here's what he writes in the introduction to the Zohar that interprets. It's not written as an interpretation from this Gemara, but having read it and read this Gemara and being troubled by it, I find it to be the best possible way that I know of to answer this Gemara. There are other ways, but it's a very good way. This is how you should read the Gemara. The world was created in one of two directions. And they're actually both true at the same time. Either for the completely wicked means the idea of creation has a component, a very strong component of ratzon l'kabel. It's inherent in creation that there be a desire to receive. And that means at a young age, the person isn't thinking altruistically, isn't thinking about others. It's just thinking about him or herself, what it needs to survive and live. As the person gets older, their receptors of what they want grow more sophisticated. So, for example, while a young person may want just food, somebody a little bit more mature might want recognition, might even want intellectual stimulation rather than just physical pleasure. But they still want for themselves. Their wanting for themselves may include other people, but it's primarily about themselves. And as a person matures spiritually, they start wanting to do other things for other people. And that transition to wanting to give is called Ratzon LaHashpia. And the Ratzon LaHashpia is when you become more similar in your nature to the divine nature, because the difference between creator and created is the creator is his Ratzon, his desire is to give, and the created is desire is to receive. But the goal of creation is that the human being should transition from wanting to receive for the need to receive to be able to then give. And when a person does that correctly, so they won't receive in a non-kosher way. For example, they won't kill and steal to get stuff because they're only going to want to receive that which is permitted. And they're only going to want to receive that which is necessary for them to be able to live on. The ultimate of that is Chanina ben Dosa. The ultimate of the person who took for himself without wanting to share is Ahab. So in that sense, they both are the epitomes of two extremes. We're all in the middle. We're all working ourselves out. We want to go away from being like Ahab, like Ahab, and closer to Chanina ben Dosa. We're not going to get to Chanina ben Dosa. There are two extremes. The Gemara is setting up a dichotomy to show us how bad it could be and how good it could be. Where do we find ourselves? And with this, we answer a lot of questions. Why we were created, if we're going to go through all of this. And the answer is that we need to have the desire to receive, to be able to transform ourselves, because otherwise God wouldn't have had to make the world. He made the world so we would want to receive, so that we could take that power of receiving and translate it into something meaningful, use it for holiness to be able to give. And that would explain also why, for example, the ultimate is Tchias HaMesim, the revival of the dead. Why don't we just have Olam Haba without Tchias HaMesim? Because the ultimate of this world, which is physical, which is where the desire to receive is the most able to be felt, needs to be transformed. So ultimately, it comes back to this world. That's a little bit about Rabbi Ashlag on understanding this Gemara. That's number 8. Now we're up to number 9. Number 9 is a story. What's the story? The story is about Rabbi Akiva. And it was a time where there was a decree by the Romans that Jews should not be able to engage in teaching Torah. And there was a man named Papas ben Yehuda. There's all questions about who he was. He was a historical figure who had his own run-ins with the Romans. And he saw that Rabbi Akiva was endangering his life by making makal kilot b'rabim. He's making big public gatherings to be able to teach Torah ads. And he said, "My friend Akiva, are you not afraid of this great empire of Rome that will, God forbid, what they can do to you if they catch you?" Rabbi Akiva said, "Let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a parable. There was once a fox that was walking along the bank of a river. And he saw fish in the river darting around, here to there to here. And he asked them, why are you running? Why are you guys such a tizzy? And the fish responded, we're trying to make sure we don't get caught. There's fishermen, they've got nets, and we want to not be caught. The fox said, why don't you come up and be with me on dry land? We'll live together, like our ancestors used to live together. The fish responded, they say of you that you're the cleverest of the animals, but you're not clever at all, you're a fool. If even in the place of our life, meaning in the water, we're still afraid that we might get caught, how much more so in the place of our death on dry land, we certainly won't survive at all. We'll die. Rabbi Akiva explained. We that are studying Torah, that it says about the Torah, Kihu chayecha barech yamecha, it is our life and the length of our days. And we're still in danger of getting caught. But if we stop studying Torah, how much more so we won't even be in our place of life, like the fish who will go because they're not in the water. And so it was that a little while later they were both caught for their respective so-called crimes, put in jail, and Yehuda, Papas ben Yehuda says, "Oy, you saw Rabbi Akiva, woe is to me, and blessed and fortunate are you. You were caught for teaching Torah, and I was caught for Dvarim B'Telem, whatever, not such significant things." So what is the analogy between the fish and the water and the fox? Some people say that the fox represents the nations of the world that tell the Jewish people, just stop it already with your mishagas of trying to be Jewish. Just assimilate and be like the rest of us. When in Rome, and what is the popular expression? When in Rome. So you're in Rome, come up on dry land and just become part of the Roman society. Stop with the Jewish stuff already. So that's one way of understanding it. Another way of understanding it is that what does the water represent? So we know, for example, that when the water split during the time of the Jews, the children of Israel leaving Egypt, and the Medrash tells us that Ra Shivcha Aliyam, that a maidservant saw a higher level of prophecy than Yecheskel ben Buzi saw, which means that when the water split, that meant insight of what was going on beneath the surface of the water. And to explain that underneath the surface of the water, Kol ma sheyesh b'yam, asher yesh b'yam, whatever is in the land also exists in the water as well. The difference is that in the water, it's concealed because it's covered over by water. Most people can't breathe underwater. It's a new thing, this ocean exploration. But what that represents spiritually is a whole universe of things that are there but unseen, a spiritual place. So the fact that Rabbi Akiva used the analogy of the fish in the sea, it wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just a brilliant parable of animals talking to each other, talking animals, great feature film for Disney. But what it was very specific. The fish of the sea represent a whole way of being that's permeated by another level of consciousness that we're not even aware of if we're up on dry land. So when the fox said, "Come up to the dry land," the response of the fish is, they say you're the wisest, and you don't get it at all. This is the source of our life. Our source of our life is on this level. It's not that we're, just regular people, but we also want to do a little mitzvah over here and a mitzvah over there, retain a little Jewish identity. That's the problem with a lot of people in the world. They think Judaism is just a thing of Jewish identity, as if it's some, I don't know, like name you call yourself. And Akiva says, no, the Torah, which is our lives, the Torah that takes us beneath the surface of what things are to this spiritual reality, that's really where we want to be. It's not safe there either, but that's who we are. We want to live on that level where we're submerged in that other dimension of divine existence. It's a very spiritual teaching. A lot of people are not ready for it. But that's what Rabbi Akiva was trying to tell him. Now, Rabbi Akiva was in a very high level. We're not on Rabbi Akiva's level, so Papas Ben Yehuda was a good man. He was in prison for political reasons that he was also doing mitzvot. He was also doing good things. He took the blame for something that wasn't his fault to save Jews from being killed, according to another parallel story in another place. But yet it was Rabbi Akiva who saw this whole nother level of reality. What level of reality did he see? So that's number 10. Rabbi Akiva's final hour. Greatest rabbis who ever lived at his greatest moment. The time they took Rabbi Akiva out to be executed was the time of reciting the Shema. They were torturing him. They were combing his flesh with iron combs. But he was receiving upon himself that God is the king. His students said to him, "Our master, how much?" Meaning, how are you able to even think about God at this moment of torture? Rabbi Akiva responded, "My whole life, I was bothered about the verse that says, B'chol nafshecha. We say, B'chol levav, we say in the Shema, B'chol levavcha, B'chol nafshecha, B'chol ma'odecha, with all of your heart, 2 hearts, Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, all of your soul and all of your might." But I was bothered, the thing that I obsessed about, Rabbi Akiva says, is all of your life, all of your soul, all of your life. Would that happen, that I could actually do that? Would I be able to willingly give my life up in my faith for God? Now that it's come before me, should I not do this? And he was saying along Echad, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is our God, God is one. He was saying the one, he was saying a very long one. And that's when his soul departed. And a bas kol, a heavenly voice went out and said, Ashrecha Rabbi Akiva, Nishmascha, Shiyatza Nishmascha Be'echad. Praiseworthy are you, Rabbi Akiva, that your soul went out in one. The angel said before God, is this the Torah? Is this its rewards? And God responded to them, their portion is eternal life. And a heavenly voice went out and says, fortunate are you, Rabbi Akiva, that you are invited to go straight into heaven in the world to come. Now, very, very, very heavy stuff. Based on some commentaries and some other sections of the Talmud, I'd like to say the following. Rabbi Akiva was not killed by the Romans. He would have been killed eventually. Rabbi Akiva had what's called kalos hanefesh. He died not simply al kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name. He did on some level. But he died because of his intense attraction to unite his soul with God. His level of b'chol nafshecha meant to love God with all of his soul, meant that his whole soul would literally leave his body in its love of God. Now, usually, that's not okay. For example, that's how Hasidic texts explain the death of Nadav and Avihu, that they died b'kirvatam lifnei Hashem v'yamutu. They died in their quest to get close to God because they had a ratzon, had a desire, and they didn't have the shov. They didn't have the ability or desire to be held down in this physical world. They just wanted to go up. We also know in the story of the Arba Shenichlas of the Pardes, the four that went into Pardes. Rabbi Akiva was one of them. Ben Zoma, Ben Azai, Elisha ben Avuya, Acher, we call him. Ben Azai, according to Rashi, he saw God. That's why he died. Tosfos is actually bothered. He says that means that Ben Azai saw what Moshe couldn't see, because Moshe, it says by Moshe, Kilo Yirani Adam B'chai. No one can see me and live. That would mean that Ben Azai saw something that Moshe couldn't see, and we know that nobody can see higher than Moshe. So Tosfos has another opinion. I'd like to propose that Rabbi Akiva, who nichlas b'shalom v'yatz b'shalom, at that occasion he went in peace and he came out in peace. He saw what he saw, but he came back. He didn't die. Like Moshe, Kilo Yirani Adam B'chai, you can't see God and live. At this point, Rabbi Akiva was ready to see God and not live, and that's what happened. That's why Rabbi Akiva is the source of Torah Shabbat. That's why, as great as Moshe is in the Tanakh, Rabbi Akiva is that, and on some levels even greater. And we know nobody is as great as Moshe, and that's true. But that would explain why later on Moshe would see Rabbi Akiva expounding on the Tagin, the letter, the crowns of the letters, and he would not know the answer to what Rabbi Akiva was talking about. So on some level, Rabbi Akiva, some level, surpassed him. On another level, he did not. And that is what Rabbi Akiva was doing when he died, not just simply from physical torture. It's not like he killed himself because he was going to die anyway. He died a little bit early in a state of divine unity, in a state of divine oneness. That's the highest death a person can have, to die be'echad, with oneness. According to Rav Moshe, there's no mitzvah to be tortured. So to die a little earlier than he would have, he could have held out a little bit longer if he didn't die in the state of unity, is not anything wrong. On the contrary, he died be'echad, he died sanctifying God's name. Rather than just be murdered, he died in the kiss of God, to be able to see God. Maybe we zocheh, maybe we merit to live with the Spirit, not to have to die with it, but to live with it.